NBA draft fans, welcome back to the channel with what has been a highly anticipated video from all of you in the comment section. And don't worry, I'm getting to it here, and that is my NBA draft big board version 4. So I've had 3 versions come out already, and again, a ton of shakeups here as we go into V4. And part of the reason why there is a V4 is Shaedon Sharpe declared for the 2022 NBA draft. So he will be a part of this big board now. I'm doing my top 30, but it is a little bit different in this video. I'm actually breaking up my top 30 into 2 videos because usually my whole top 30 big board takes around 45 to 55 minutes to watch. And I am trying to be conscientious of your guys' time as well to split them into 2 separate videos so that you have time for one video and then maybe time for the other video at a later time. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Hopefully it does save you guys a little bit of trouble. So let me know if this is your preferred format for these big boards moving forward. It is not a problem at all to me. I'm just trying something new to give you guys a little bit more flexibility with these videos. If you guys are new to the channel as well, please hit that like button and subscribe as well. There's a lot of work that goes into these. Every time I do a new big board, it means I watched every single player in the class that I deem as draft worthy. So that means, I watch about 60 to 70 players per cycle. So it's a lot of work that goes into these, but it's the way that I can feel like I bring the most accurate information into these videos. So let's go ahead and jump into it here. 30th, I have Trevor Keels, forward from Duke. And he's only about 6'5". He's not the most athletic player in the world. He is very young, though. He's going to be 18 on the day of the draft, and he's 220 pounds. And I think that frame is really one of the biggest things for him as a prospect. He's got a really, really strong, sturdy frame. He was a former top 25 recruit in his high school class, and as a freshman coming out of Duke, he fit a really good role for the Duke Blue Devils this past season, playing off of guys like Paolo Banchero and Mark Williams and AJ Griffin, and a few others there at Duke as well. Wendell Moore Jr., another one to name. And Trevor Keels, I think, just fits into the NBA in that kind of role where we're going to see him operate without the ball in his hands very often. But when he does have it, he's going to knock down open jump shots. He's also going to be able to drive the basketball, hit a shot blocker in the chest, and finish. He has very good concentration around the rim. And a player I liken him to a little bit is Dillon Brooks from the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, Dillon Brooks for me is a little bit more of a skilled shot creator. There's also times where Dillon Brooks takes terrible shots. And I think Trevor Keels, you're going to have to live with some of that as well at the NBA level. I think there's going to be moments where he looks like he's a really good role player that fits along a lot of players. And then there's going to be times where he does something a little questionable. And you're going to say, oh, okay, not sure about that shot there from you, Keels. And for the 30th prospect in the class, it's very rare that you're going to even have a player like Keels, as good as Keels, as the 30th best player in the class. I think this class is very, very deep. A lot of really good role players and a lot of players who I think could become all-stars down the road as well. This class is extremely talented, and I think this is one of the deepest classes I've ever evaluated. So Trevor Keels at 30 here, I still think as a first-round level player, very good pickup here for an NBA team. Then going into 29, I have Bryce McGowens, and here's one of the first big shakeups. He was not in my top 30 last time. After reevaluating Bryce McGowens, looking at his skill set and his frame, I've been saying in a lot of other videos, if I put him in a mock draft, or I simply just talk about Bryce McGowens in any capacity, I always bring up how I think a player like him with his shot creation skill set is going to work better at the NBA level, because there's a bigger court with more spacing, more talent around him. And yes, there's better defenders, there's more athletic players on the floor, but McGowens I don't think will be challenged by that as much. I think one of the biggest issues he ran into at Nebraska was consistently being faced by help defenders and an additional help defender. Teams knew on the scouting report that Bryce McGowens was going to be the guy. If anyone's going to beat you from Nebraska, it'll be McGowens. And coaching staffs and players that faced Nebraska this past year looked to really isolate him out of the game. And because of that, he shot a really poor percentage. And now I do think McGowens has some areas where he needs to improve. I think he needs to get a little bit stronger so he can deal with NBA strength a little bit easier, so he can blow by guys on the ball a little bit more. But I also think that for him, he has to improve as a playmaker. I think his three-point shot has to come around a little bit as well in catch and shoot scenarios. If you're going to take Bryce McGowens, you're going to have to wait probably a year or two before you actually get meaningful production from him at the NBA level. But I still think that this is a worthwhile investment near the back end of the first round. I could also still see him going into the second round. Remember, this is not a mock draft. This is just purely my big board. So McGowens, if he goes at 35 to 37, anywhere in the second round, it's a good pickup for me. And I think it's something that, you know, if you see a team stash him in the G League for a little bit, I think that'll be perfect for his development. I don't think he's NBA ready on day one, but remember, I am accounting potential into this, and at only 19 years old, I think there's still a lot to untap here for McGowens. Then we go on to Wendell Moore Jr., who is a little bit older. He's going to be 20 on the night of the draft, but he's a junior from Duke, 6'5", 215 pounds, but he's just very NBA ready. He's actually quite the opposite of a player like Bryce McGowens. The biggest bugaboo last year for Wendell Moore Jr. as a sophomore was his playmaking capabilities. Only averaged about an assist and a half a game, despite having the ball fairly frequently. And this past year for Duke, they actually started a lineup without a true point guard for most of the season. And Wendell Moore Jr. actually acted as a fairly consistent playmaker for this team, really increasing his assist production and also just really improving as a playmaker. It stands out when you actually watch the film. There's times where he's driving to his right hand and flings an over the head pass over to the left corner. That is something he could not have done a year ago. So he has really immensely improved as a passer. And that's partially why I think he's a draft worthy player and someone who's in my top 30 currently. He's got a very NBA ready body. He's going to be able to adjust to NBA speed, length, and strength. And I think for Wendell Moore Jr., probably not the highest upside in the class, but he has consistently improved in his time at Duke. And I think for Wendell Moore, there's a lot to unpack yet still with his ability to shoot the basketball. I think he's strong enough to finish at the rim. He's not going to be a world changer for a franchise, but I think he could be a consistent seventh guy in a rotation at some point. And if you can find that in the back end of the first round, that could be really, really valuable to add to an already good team, assuming that they're a playoff team, picking Wendell Moore Jr. at that spot, and he can help you on day one of his NBA career. Then 27, Dyson Daniels, and this is where I start to ruffle some feathers, right? Because I know Dyson Daniels, a lot of you probably love him, some of you like him, and some of you might really dislike him. And I'm kind of in that dislike camp, not as a person. I don't know Dyson Daniels as a person, but purely as a prospect. He's 6'8", 200 pounds as a point guard, so you already are like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And that's kind of what I thought. And the more I study him, the more I watch him, I try selling myself on him. I just can't. A lot of people are going to look at him as a potential lottery pick, and I think that's a possibility. I wouldn't be shocked if a team took him in the lottery. I just would not personally myself. And partially the reason why is he struggles as a three-point shooter. I know people keep saying, oh, look at his improvement from three. Okay, yeah, improving to a 25% three-point shooter maybe shows even bigger problems than what the percentage itself indicates. Because if you're going to improve up to a 25% three-point shooter, then that's not a good look. And I know, he's only 19 years old, playing against pro players for the first time. Efficiencies are going to be down. I fully account for that. I look at that in players like Marjon Beauchamp, who actually is not in my top 30 in this big board, and also a player like Jaden Hardy, where he'll be in a later one. But Dyson Daniels here, for me, as a 19-year-old with good playmaking feel and pretty solid defensive capabilities, it's just hard being a point guard and not being able to shoot the rock. We know what's happened with Ben Simmons. Playoff basketball makes him look unplayable. And I'm telling you, Ben Simmons is a much better athlete, much better defender, much better rebounder than Dyson Daniels. I think Daniels is a solid player. I think Daniels can have an impact in the league. I still have a first round level grade on him in this class, assuming, 30 picks. I have him 27th, but I'm just not as high on him as everyone else. And continuing with that theme, we got Tari Eason here, another player that some people look at as a lottery level selection, and someone who I think a lot of people think could be really, really good in this league. And I think he can be solid for sure, but I don't know if I see the really, really good trajectory. He's very raw. And I know usually when you have a raw player, like, oh, if you coach them up, improve the skill level, they could be really good. It's not just that easy to say, oh, we're going to make him better. Okay. There's certain tangible things that you need to work on with Tari Eason. I don't think he's a very good ball handler. I think he can do it out in space, but not really in traffic in the half court flow of a game. And then you also look at Tari Eason, not a consistent, great three-point shooter. He's nearly already 21 years old. At the time I'm recording this, he'll be 21 on draft night. And he's only about 6'8", and I think he's limited to probably playing power forward or maybe even small ball 5 in the league. And at about 225, 230 pounds or so, he's outmuscled a lot of players at the collegiate level. And transferring from Cincinnati to LSU was huge for his draft stock. He did show up for the LSU Tigers this year. He was clearly their best player. And again, I see him as a first-round worthy selection. I just don't know if I'd want to be the team that does it, simply because I think once you get him into the league, he's going to have an impact defensively for sure. And strength and rebounding and everything to that degree is important. I just don't know if there's any real offensive upside here that you can rely on from Tari Eason with consistency. I think he's going to be someone who probably has to make a bunch of tough shots around the rim to have a successful career. And I don't know if I see that at a high level for him. If there's a player I'm worried about being wrong about, it's probably Tari Eason. I mean, sometimes some physically gifted players just end up panning out better than I could look at based off the skill set I'm evaluating. But I think Tari Eason, long way to go in his development. But again, a lot of tangible strengths as well when it comes to physicals, athleticism, really good second jump ability. And he's a player that, I mean, if the development track works for him, could end up being actually really good. 25, we move on to Kendall Brown, who just keeps sliding down my board. Last time he was around 21. This time he finds himself down 25. And at the start of the process here, before the college season started, I thought he was going to be a top 10 pick. Then college season got underway. I was like, okay, maybe back end lottery. And then I started putting him in the 17, 18 area. And now in my big board, I'm just feeling really not super high on him. 6'8" wing out of Baylor, pretty good athlete, got some long arms, can knock down a couple open jump shots. The biggest thing for me when I watch him is he is very disinterested in shooting the ball, despite not shooting a terrible percentage. Shot about 34% from 3, but only on a little bit more than 1 attempt a game. So he's very hesitant. And you can actually see that on film as well when you watch him. He'll catch the ball wide open. Defenses will not close out on him, and he still hesitates to shoot the ball, which is a major red flag for me, specifically when you're looking at a small forward / power forward type of prospect. You want players like him to be able to knock down open jump shots, specifically with where we're at in the modern NBA. Everyone seemingly needs to shoot, which I don't agree with. And I think Kendall Brown could still be a good player if he never becomes a great shooter. I think Kendall Brown could be someone who, with his length and his versatility, could guard 2 through 4, and I think is going to really make things difficult for an offense when he's on the floor, because he's going to be a really good gap defender. That's what I see mostly out of him. He's got, again, those long arms. I think he's going to challenge shots around the rim fairly well, and he's going to get into passing lanes. And I think Kendall Brown, as well offensively, can kind of work as a hybrid creator for others, where he catches. And if a team's not going to close out on him, he doesn't need to force those shots either. He can attack the rim, look for kickouts from there, and just try and put pressure on the defense in other ways other than just shooting open 3-point shots. However, that is a big concern still for me, though. The fact that he is hesitant to shoot those does pull him down my board a little bit. It's not the fact that he's not making them. It's the fact that he's very hesitant to even shoot them. Seems like he doesn't even want to look at the rim at certain points throughout Baylor season. Then 24, Malaki Branham. And this is going to maybe feel a little low to everyone else. And I understand why. Malaki Branham is a good player, and he played very well this past year for Ohio State as a freshman. At 6'5", around 190 to 200 pounds, he's got a decent frame on him already. I think once he gets to the NBA, he's going to get stronger and even more of a physically gifted player. The only question for me is, part of those physical gifts really did not include quickness. He's not a very quick player. I think his ball handle's rather loose yet at this point. And he's someone who I think cannot consistently beat people off the dribble at the next level. And with his play style and his skill set, you would like him to be able to do that a little bit more, specifically if you're going to play him at the 2 at the NBA level. Now, the one thing that I think could be interesting at the NBA level for punishing smaller teams or teams that are playing smaller, you maybe put Malaki Branham into the post and use him as a post-up guard, which is very rare in today's league, but there are certain times where it can work and be very successful. I kind of think about a Wesley Matthews type of role earlier in Wes Matthews' career, back when he was near a max level player. And Wesley Matthews would get utilized out of the post quite a bit, and partially because he wasn't the quickest player, couldn't beat a lot of people off the dribble, but get him into that 12 to 18 foot area, and he's a pretty good shooter. And I think Malaki Branham is going to fall into that as well. He is a talented scorer. He can knock down the 3-point shot with consistency and is also really good in the mid-range area, even with a hand in his face. So there's ways to utilize Malaki Branham, but I also think there are flaws that would pull him down my personal big board. Again, I think he could be a top 20 pick in the draft, and this is not an expectation for where I think he'll get drafted. This is how I think their careers are going to play out. And I think Malaki Branham, probably the 24th best player in the class. Then 23, Ron Harper Jr. And this is maybe where I start to ruffle more feathers. Yes, I have Ron Harper Jr. over Malaki Branham and Kendall Brown. And Ron Harper Jr. keeps climbing my board because the more and more I think about it, the more and more I really like players like Ron Harper Jr. Last year, I was very high on Herb Jones. I had him as a top 30 player in the class, and I feel like I was one of the few people that actually evaluated him that way. And Ron Harper Jr. is a much better offensive player than Herb Jones was coming out of Alabama last year. Harper Jr., son of former NBA champion Ron Harper, played for the Bulls and Lakers most notably. Ron Harper Jr. is a very gifted defensive player, just like his father, has very good technique on that end of the floor, knows how to use his feet, out in space. He's got very good glide mechanic that helps him beat players to the spot despite not being the quickest player on the floor. And he just has a good understanding of what offensive players want to do against him. And he usually uses his frame to his advantage in those scenarios. 6'6", 245 is nothing to scoff at. That's a big physical frame. Now I think, I have a scouting profile of him up on the channel. I think if he were to slim down a little bit, maybe down to 240, or stay at that 245 mark, but put on a little bit more muscle, lose a little bit of that baby fat he still got on him, it would benefit him. But at 6'6", I think he's going to be able to guard 2 through 4 consistently. And I think at certain points, you can put him on point guards as well. There was times this year when they played Purdue, he matched up with Jaden Ivey and more than held his own in those matchups. So I think Ron Harper Jr., a very intriguing prospect. A lot of people aren't talking about him. I know he's 22 years old already, but I think if you're looking at a player like Malaki Branham and comparing him to Ron Harper Jr., Harper Jr. has some of the same creation elements offensively, but is a much better defender. I know he's a few years older, but again, sometimes potential always doesn't play out. And I know Ron Harper Jr. is going to be a good contributor on day one. 22, Blake Wesley here, a 6'5" point guard from Notre Dame, weighs around 185 pounds, and at 19 years old, has a ton of potential. I just talked about how sometimes potential doesn't play out. In Blake Wesley's case, this is where you're talking about the risk, right? At 22, he could end up being a top 15 player in this class, or he could end up falling even lower. It just kind of depends on how everything plays out for him. One thing that he is very, very quick, really good hands, and he's got pretty solid athleticism vertically as well to match with those things. And he's got a very nice tight handle. That's one of the things I really love about Blake Wesley, which is what's keeping him at this spot on my board and not pulling him down, is he's very, very good with the basketball in his hands, specifically as a primary ball handler. He can beat people off the dribble with his quickness. The biggest concern though I have is his basketball IQ. There's certain times where he tries to do it himself a little bit too much. I think he's got the skill to do it, and part of that is playing at Notre Dame, where he probably just, quite frankly, was the most talented player on that team for the Fighting Irish. But ultimately, Blake Wesley, there are certain times where his team would be on, a 7-0 run or down 3 with, 2 minutes to go, and he takes just one questionable shot or makes one questionable decision, and it makes you go, oof, I don't know if I want that on my team. Part of why Blake Wesley is not a top 20 player for me in this class is some of those decisions. But at the same time, the nice thing about decision making is usually young guards struggle with decision making, and then they tend to improve throughout a long NBA career. And I think Wesley's physical profile, his ability with the ball in his hands to create shots for himself, and his ability to get to the rim and finish with that athleticism I talked about earlier, makes Blake Wesley an intriguing prospect still for me at 22. Then to 21, we have Nikola Jovic here from Serbia, playing for Mega Basket this past season. And at 6'10", 210 pounds, he continues to remind me of a young Danilo Gallinari. Of course, the physicals match up very well, and so does some of the offensive skill set points. He is a talented passer, does a lot of the ball handling right now overseas for his team that he's playing for in the Mega Basket League. And then also Nikola Jovic, about 50% of his shots are coming from the three-point line. So he's a high volume three-point shooter, shoots about 10 shots a game, and nearly 5 of them a game are coming from that three-point line. Like I talked about, he can shoot it from distance. He can shoot it with regularity. He's got some good range on his shot, and his technique and fundamentals on his jumper do look pretty good. I think he's got to improve as a mid-range scorer to get to that Danilo Gallinari comparison. Gallinari was someone who was drafted fairly low as well for his actual skill set, and someone we saw develop in front of our eyes when he went from the Knicks to the Nuggets, really cemented himself as a great player, and then ultimately got paid by the Los Angeles Clippers. I think Jovic could have a similar career path where he gets drafted, maybe takes a little bit to catch on in the league, gets traded once or twice or something along those lines, and then all of a sudden everyone's talking about Nikola Jovic having a pretty nice NBA career and a pretty healthy payday to go along with it. Jovic, he's got the skill set everyone's looking for, a bigger wing with playmaking upside who can also knock down the three ball with regularity. He has had a little bit of a down year in comparison to his short season the year before, but ultimately he's still a top 25 player in this class for me, and I think a player who is going to have a pretty nice role in today's league. 20, I've got Ochai Agbaji here, and this one might give my viewers a heart attack. Yes, I have Agbaji down at 20, and it's not really any knock on Agbaji. He's a good player. I just think that there's other players who maybe have higher upside than him, or players I just believe in a little bit more. Anyone from 20 to 17 is really close. I could have had Agbaji as high as 17. I opted to have him at 20 in this one, but I could make an argument for him being a little bit higher as well. And for me with Agbaji, what I know he's going to do is play within a role very well at the NBA level, specifically as an off-the-ball wing offensively and a consistent team defender on the defensive side of the floor. I don't think he'll ever be a stopper. I don't think he'll ever be a great gap defender getting 2 steals a game. What I think is he'll be in the right spot at the right time a lot of the time. And that's something that's very reliable, and coach is going to love that. I've consistently likened Ochai Agbaji to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I think those two players are very similar with the way that they're going to work at the NBA level. KCP, a former top 10 pick, hasn't maybe had the upside that you would have hoped from him when he got drafted, but has still made almost $100 million in his NBA career. And I think a lot of NBA teams would love to have him on their roster right now. And I think Agbaji is going to follow a similar career path where he's going to probably end up having a really nice long career, make a lot of money playing, and a lot of teams are going to say, wow, it'd be really helpful to have Ochai Agbaji on our roster right now. And I think for Agbaji at 20, it just goes to show how strong this class is. I think if this class was any weaker, maybe he could be a lottery pick. I still wouldn't rule that out either. For me, I don't think he's worthy of that, but I would not rule that out. I think Cleveland, if they get the 14th pick, would really consider Agbaji. But ultimately, with Ochai here, I think there's some pretty good roles that he could fit in the NBA. 19, Kennedy Chandler here from Tennessee, a 6-foot guard at 170 pounds. You might be saying, wow, you have this guy in your top 20? And yes, I do. The reasoning why is sometimes you have to look past the physicals and just ask yourself, is this player a good player? And Kennedy Chandler is. In his time with FIBA U19 World Cup team that ended up winning gold, he was playing alongside Johnny Davis and Jaden Ivey and Chet Holmgren. He made himself known in that. And then he also at Tennessee this past year really continued to progress throughout the season. He's a very nice defender who can act as a pest and has very quick hands and feet. That's the biggest appeal here for Kennedy Chandler. He'll pick up 94 feet and he'll stay in front of you that entire time. You're not going to get easy buckets against Chandler. He's also someone who I think is a perfect defensive guard in the pick and roll era because, a lot of teams either go to drop coverage or they try a high hedge and switch. And Kennedy Chandler, you don't need to worry about any of that. He will get through screens. He's very quick, very adept at that end of the floor. And then he's growing as an offensive player. Now, he doesn't shoot the ball extremely well. He's not the best mid-range creator. I think that's one of his biggest flaws. But he also does get to the rim with consistency. He's a very selfless player who always makes the right pass. And I think with Kennedy Chandler, if you're looking for a secondary creator or someone who maybe leads your bench unit as a point guard, or you could even play him next to a talented point guard in himself, it could work. And I know people are going to look at the size and question it. Jalen Brunson's having a pretty good playoffs. And not that Kennedy Chandler will be him, but it goes to show that a smaller point guard, a smaller type of guard, can either play on the ball or off the ball. I think Chandler can do either. And I think defensively is a much better defensive player than Jalen Brunson. So I think Chandler does have a future in this league. And I think at 19, it's a very justifiable spot to have Kennedy Chandler from Tennessee. 18, TyTy Washington. Ooh, he's taken a little bit of a fall as well from where I had him historically, but still at 18, I look at him as a dependable point guard. Probably a starting level point guard, but near the bottom half of the league when it comes to what I see his upside as a starter. He's 20 years old, 6'3", so he's got pretty good frame to him. And the one thing about TyTy Washington, when you watch this kid, you consistently see great footwork from him on the offensive side of the basketball. He's very, very reliable when it comes to putting the ball in his hands. He'll make a lot of good decisions for you. He'll spread the basketball around. He's adept in the pick and roll game offensively. As a ball handler, he's going to hit the roll man. He's also very good at hitting the roll man on short roll situations. So if you have a talented big, you can use TyTy Washington to get him the ball at different spots of the floor. And then the other thing is TyTy Washington, when he's shooting the ball, he's ready to shoot. He catches with his feet square to the hoop, and he's going to knock it down with regularity. He's a little hesitant to shoot the three ball, not nearly as hesitant as Kendall Brown, who we talked about earlier, but he prefers the mid-range area. And that's not a bad thing. I think not enough NBA offense right now works through the mid-range game. You look at the best offense in the league statistically by pretty much every single advanced metric, it's the Phoenix Suns, and they shoot the most mid-range jump shots in the entire league. We know how good Chris Paul and Devin Booker are there. TyTy Washington, probably not to the level of those guys, but still a solid mid-range scorer out of the pick and roll who can run an offense, whether that's around other stars, which I think is probably the best case here, where TyTy Washington becomes a ball handler for a team with wing scoring and wing upside. That makes sense to me. I don't think TyTy Washington's ever going to be the guy that you build your franchise around by any stretch, but I think he can be a starting level point guard in this league. 17, Ousmane Dieng, and this is a player with immense upside, but there's also a bigger risk here with him, which is why I'm a little more hesitant to putting him in my top 15. At 6'9", 215 pounds, playing essentially point guard for the New Zealand Breakers of the NBL. He's a very intriguing prospect, specifically because he puts a lot of pressure on the rim. He's solid defensively, and he's also someone who is a very gifted passer. He is very adept as well, just like TyTy Washington in the pick and roll game, but I also think he's better than TyTy Washington in the open floor as a facilitator. He puts a lot of pressure on the rim, like I talked about, but he's also not afraid to drive and then kick the basketball out to shooters. Hugo Besson's one of the biggest friends of Ousmane Dieng, I'm sure, based on the way that those two play together in the NBL. Very, very good combination, putting shooters around Ousmane Dieng. I just think it naturally works. Honestly, the more I watch Ousmane Dieng, the more I think to myself, this is the player that everyone thought Killian Hayes could be. And for me with Dieng, I think he's going to be a very nice pickup for an NBA team. I think he could be a lottery pick, and I think it would be fairly well warranted. There's a lot of upside here. The one bugaboo on him is he just has not shot the three ball well with consistency. He is a high 20% three-point shooter right now. Now, he does take tough shots, okay? It's not just wide open looks like Dyson Daniels gets for the G League Ignite. I'm talking about shots off the bounce, step back shots. He does take some tough ones. So that's partially why his percentage is as low as it is. But at the same time, that is still a concern, right? You can't look at a sub 30% three-point shooter and say, oh, I'm not worried because it's a tough shot. Okay, like that's still a concern for me. Luka Doncic, who shoots a ton of tough shots, shoots around 34-35% from three. So if Dieng's going to want to become a more reliable half-court scorer, I think he's got to improve his shot still at this point, which is why he's not in my top 15. And then we get to the final prospect of this video. Just a reminder, top 15 is going to come out the day after this video does. So make sure to subscribe so you can check that video out. And I have Mark Williams here, which maybe feels a little low as well for Mark Williams. At 7 foot, 240 pounds, he's a very good NBA body. And at 20 years old, he showed immense improvement in his sophomore season for the Duke Blue Devils and had really great chemistry as well with Paolo Banchero. Caught numerous oops from Banchero this past season. And I think is someone who fits today's NBA very well at the center spot. He's going to be a great rim running center who's willing to set screens and roll to the basket, and he's going to protect the rim on the other end of the floor. He's very athletic, good second jump ability, Pretty good hands as well. I think that was one of the biggest things that stood out to me. He's got great hands. He's going to catch nearly every single pass you throw his way, which is tough to do. And that's a tough thing to ask for centers because sometimes those windows are tight. The passes come in pretty crisp. And yet Mark Williams seemingly caught every single pass thrown to him this year, even in really tight windows. So that's a credit to him and his hands. And I think for me, the one issue I have with Mark Williams is he's kind of a tweener between some of the other bigs in this class, specifically when you look at like a Jalen Duren, who I think is going to become very switchable out in space, or a Walker Kessler, who's going to be elite in drop coverage. I don't know if Mark Williams is going to be elite in space or elite in drop coverage. I think he just ends up being pretty decent in both, which is good. Being decent in both of those things is a good thing to be. I still have him as a top 16 player in this class, and I'm right on the brink of having him in the top 15. I really thought about Mark Williams moving up a few spots over 16 because it feels low to me, but at the same time, just given my concerns about what he's going to be elite at the NBA level, I think it's justifiable to have Mark Williams at 16 here. I think he's an all-around very good player. I just don't know if there's an elite trait that I can really cling on to here and say this is why he should be a little bit higher. This specific skill is something that I want on my team. So Mark Williams at 16, just outside the lottery. I think that's very fair. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, my top 15 is coming out on the channel soon. Just make sure to come check back. Hit that like button on today's video as well if you did enjoy, and also subscribe. Go check out our socials. Link will be in the description for those. Again, thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.